Hi Noshers, my name is Micah, the host of Not Your Bubby's Nosh, a conversation about your favorite and least favorite Jewish foods, your go-to source for holiday meal inspiration, and a place to discuss and kvetch about which bubby made it best. Welcome back to another special episode of Not Your Bubby's Nosh. Today I am with my friend, Faith Kramer. She is a fellow columnist at the J Weekly, the Jewish news of Northern California, and it is such a pleasure to be in her presence. Faith is a food writer and recipe developer, and she focuses her writing on the foodways, history, and customs of the Jewish diaspora across the globe. She develops recipes and writes about these Jewish customs for the Jewish News of Northern California, where she has a column on food and cooking along with original recipes, as well as for her local synagogue's newsletter. She is also the author of 52 Shabbats, a beautiful cookbook that celebrates a full year of Shabbats with recipes across the globe. So Faith, thank you so much for being here. It's been way too long since we've done anything in person, so this will have to do today. But welcome to Not Your Bubby's Nosh. Let's get started. I'd love to get a little background about who you are, how long you've been doing this, and let's just hear all about you.
Okay, well, first I want to say that I love what the name of the podcast is, because one of the ways in the early days I tried to introduce my global flavored, locally cooked Jewish food was it's not your grandmother's cooking. And now I have two granddaughters. I have to amend that. And so, unless of course I am your grandmother, then this is how your grandmother cooks. But I like to take the kind of the wisdom and the traditions and give them a spin for how we eat today.
That's great. And how long have you been in the recipe writing space?
I grew up with a mother who was a fearless cook, and she didn't exactly teach me how to cook, but let me loose in the kitchen. I remember once I was trying to thicken a frosting I made, and she wasn't home for whatever reason, and I grabbed the flour and I thickened it up, but it didn't taste right. And she tasted it and she said, "What a clever idea." She said, "You had the right idea. You just needed to thicken it. You just didn't know you needed to use sugar. So next time, thicken with the sugar." And I think I traced my recipe writing back to that if my mother had given me some other reaction, something negative, oh, how stupid, whatever that would have been. And my mother was often critical of me in a loving way, but critical. So the fact that she was so supportive in that really stands out. And I think that's where I trust my recipe writing career to it. But I really didn't begin to write my own recipes until I cooked a lot of other people's recipes to kind of figure out what my taste palette was, what kinds of things I had the skill set for, what skill sets I need to learn. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I actually started writing recipes. So that is about over 40 years now I've been writing recipes. First, for myself, I have a big book of handwritten recipes from my early years of recipe writing. And then on a blog called Click Blog Appetit, which is still there. It's like watching old home movies. I can't quite dump it, but I don't really like to look at it very much. Yeah. So clickblogappetit.com. And then with my column at the J at jweekly.com, where I've been writing for 14 years or so. Every 2 weeks, ready or not, I need to have some new recipes done. And then, of course, with my cookbook, 52 Shabbats, where I've pulled together some of my favorites, created some new ones, revised some others, and presented in a menu format plus for people to plan their Shabbats and understand where the food comes from. Context for food is very important to me. The story behind the recipe, not just the people's story, but the economics, the geography, the tradition, how the ingredient is used. All that kind of comes together. Even politics plays into how a recipe is shaped.
Mm-hmm. There's so much background knowledge and understanding that goes into a recipe. It's not just throwing things together and see if it tastes good, but thinking about where those ingredients come from and why they're used together oftentimes is always interesting. I think that that's such a fun part about the recipe writing process.
Well, I think that when we come to Jewish food, it's not just tradition and political, economic, geography issues. You have symbolism, you have religious observance, you have Jewish history comes into play. You have a whole calendar with astrological impact on the food and what's served at different times of year. There's so much that goes into it. And then, of course, we have the diaspora, where we've had migration, forced or otherwise, from place to place to place, and how Jews have adopted or created foods from this experience just flows into the recipe. And it's not just this finding this context for the recipes. Did not have a Jewish education growing up. I was brought up Jewish. I had a grandmother that was kosher, but it was all just around me. I really didn't participate or was educated in it. And I'd like to say that everything I know about Judaism, I learned from food, because the story's all there.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we're biased, but I think it's such a fun way to learn and get involved and immersed in Jewish history and cultures. But we're, of course, biased because we're here and this is what we do for a living. So
I was just thinking, I remember my first recipe that I typed up, and I had it printed out at work on the dot matrix printer at work, kind of on the sly, because we weren't supposed to use it for personal things. And these printers were big and noisy. They were put in their own room, and they put big plexiglass things over them. So we're going way back in technology. And it was for a tofu scramble. So my very first recipe that I wrote up like that and printed out was for a tofu scramble. So I have, I'm an omnivore, but I have deep vegetarian roots.
I love that. I love a tofu scramble. So, and on that, what were you doing before you got into recipe writing?
My background is in journalism.
Okay.
And public relations marketing. And I've been writing about food for a very long time, just kind of preserving my amateur status. And then when I was 14, when my youngest son was 14, he's 32 now, I decided, what was I waiting for? Mm-hmm. My days of hands-on mothering. I'll always be a mother. I'll always be involved in their lives, but I'll always be making them ice cream birthday cakes. But my days of hands-on mothering were winding up. And, what did I want for the next phase? And I decided I want to be a food writer. In fact, I even had a little blog called I Want to Be a Food Writer at Blogspot. And where I chronicled how I went about it and what I did. And then in my mind, when I was hired for the recipe column for the J, which is the Jewish newspaper of Northern California, at jweekly.com, a little plug for them, great articles, including our recipes, no paywall. And that I felt, hey, I've made it. And then when I started getting freelance recipe development or writing gigs, and then of course, when I hit the book, I was just thinking the other day, it'd be cute to go back to find that old blog and kind of update it. Not that anyone ever reads it, but say, hey, I made it. I'm here.
I love that. I didn't know that about you. So I'm so grateful that you shared that. I love hearing what people did before this, because it's not something that, even for me, I didn't think that you could get paid to do this until I started doing this. And I didn't think that it could be a job until I started to do it. And I know that everyone comes with such interesting backgrounds, and your experience in journalism and the PR probably helped you make those moves towards being able to do this.
I would say I definitely come from the writing side, and that my old clickblogappetit.com shows that, where the story is as important to me as the recipe. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons I do have a new website called faithkramer.com, where it's really about my history, my background, and about 52 Shabbats, Friday night dinners inspired by a global Jewish kitchen. But I am starting a newsletter, so it's called Newish. It's going to debut this in November. I haven't picked a date yet because I want to make sure it's right before I put it out. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a free monthly newsletter, and I'm going to cover Jewish things and non-Jewish things, but all the recipes will be kosher, even if they're not labeled. So they'll be accessible to everybody. And if you want to sign up for it, you can go to faithkramer.substack.com and sign up there for newish. I'm still playing with the subtitle. Today's flavor for today's kitchen was my son's suggestion, but I don't think I'll go with that. But that gives you the idea.
Yeah, I like the name of it regardless. And I'd love to talk about 52 Shabbats. It's such a beautiful book. It looks like it's been doing so well. How did the idea of 52 Shabbats come about?
The idea for 52 Shabbats happened more than a dozen years ago. And it really took my publisher, Angela Engel, at Collective Book Studios to make it come from my head to the page. You know, she really pushed me to do it. But the idea came about 12 years ago. And I was at someone's house for Shabbat dinner. It's Dawn Margolin. Her recipe is adapted in the book. It's the cover recipe. It's the spice rub chicken. And she's got this understand my husband and I were in the furniture business. We sold furniture to furniture stores. We were manufacturers reps. And so I've seen a lot of furniture in my time. I have never seen a dining room table this big. It must have been 54 inches wide. It was just huge. And the reason she had such a big table, she filled it every Shabbat with people. But what was on the table for 25 years was the same recipe. It was that spice rub chicken. And that fascinated me, the story behind why she settled on that recipe, why that recipe spoke to her. And the fact that, and I said, what are the other Shabbat stories out there? And I really tried hard at first to gather people's stories. And it was really hard because people don't see themselves of what they're doing is anything radical or different, or people that don't do it. And they just don't, it's just it's not something that they want to necessarily brag about or talk about. So I started looking into what are the different Shabbat customs around the world. And there was shockingly little available to a non-Hebrew speaker about what the different customs were around the world. So I started piecing them together. And wherever you see them in the book is filled with little essays about Jewish communities around the world and what their customs are and their Shabbat customs, if I could find them out. And then I realized that part of this is that Shabbat customs are so individualistic that you cannot make real sweeping statements about them. Like, well, could you say American Jews all have matzo ball soup, chicken soup with matzo balls? Well, maybe a lot of them do, but I'm sure vegetarians don't, or vegans don't, and I just went through this whole process of trying to figure out what were some symbolic foods. One example from the book is the layered chicken and vegetable plov, which is based on a Bukharan Jew from Uzbekistan customs that I haven't experienced personally, but I read about in several places where on Friday night dinner, at the end of the dinner, they bring this seasoned rice dish like a pilaf, a plov, or a plov out, and it has some chicken in it, but it's not a main course thing. So I turned this into a main course thing for a Saturday night dinner. So I went through with things that I could find that were like that. And then I just started early on in COVID, the Jewish Forward writer started a hashtag on Twitter called Tweet Your Shabbat. And I started following that. Now it's petered out. Very few people use it. But back then, you would see 60 or 80 posts every Friday, Saturday about what people were having or did have for Shabbat. And I was blown away by the breadth. People were having Thai curry. People were having omelets. People were getting takeout food, as well as, people were having brisket and chicken or what have you. But it really just said, it's a Friday night dinner. What is important about it is that it's a connection for people. It's a connection to your Jewishness. How can I help that? How can I increase that? And I thought, well, if you're eating food that has a Jewish story to it some way, maybe it's the ingredient, maybe it's the symbolism, maybe it's this myriad of ways that it could connect. Maybe it's the technique or what have you. Wouldn't that add to a sense of connection? And that was the germ for 52 Shabbats.
That's so special. And I originally thought that maybe it was your love of travel, because it sounds like you and your husband are always somewhere, whether you're camping across the US or going to far off places. It looks like you're always having fun somewhere else.
Yeah, the book, every bit of me informs this book. So my love for certain flavors definitely informs the book. The fact I like things a little bit on the spicy side, but don't worry if you don't like spicy, I always give you options, informs the book. And then, of course, my travel and my religious practice informs the book. My kind of journalism background informs the book because I do provide so many essays and stories and about the ingredients, about the communities, about the practices, that I try to really give some of the context I learned when I was researching to the reader. Some people say they came to read the essays and they stayed for the recipes, and other people say they came for the recipes and they stayed to read the books. So I'm very flattered either way. The travel has a huge, huge part. First of all, I've got to see where some of these old Jewish communities, some of which barely exist anymore, were. I mean, I got to tramp through the Jewish community of Izmir and Istanbul. I've been to Chabad houses in some far-flung places. My husband was in one in Kathmandu. I haven't been there, but I've had Friday night dinners and at Chabad houses in Phnom Penh, in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City and Japan and around the world, Amsterdam, just around the world. So I've been invited to people's homes for Hanukkah parties and Shabbat dinners. And, I bring all that to the book. Plus just the food I eat when I travel has informed what I do as well. One recipe in the book, I was in Siem Reap near Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and I had this phenomenal beef kebab with this peanut, lemongrass, ginger paste kind of marinade. And I thought, this is so great. How can I bring this? And I said, how can I make this so my readers could enjoy it? Because I just think it's got this pop of flavor that's almost undescribable. It's just such a great experience eating it. And I thought, well, what if I put it on flanken, which is cross-cut short ribs? And it kind of is like a kebab with its own little built-in rib handle. You can hold it up and eat around the bones. And it worked out beautifully. So in that case, my travel definitely decided the recipe, but I found a way to make it Jewish. Another example is my fruit and salad rolls. I was in Thailand at a night market, and this woman was making salad rolls, with different vegetables, maybe a little mango, and she was rolling them and creating them in a way I'd never seen. And it was so much easier than the way I had learned. And I started thinking about how my mother-in-law always liked to start her Shabbat dinner with a compote, a fruit compote. And it was such a part of my husband's life growing up in our life together while Mom was still with us. And I was thinking, I always hated her fruit compote because she sprinkled it with tang. And it was just awful. She felt it preserved the colors nicely. And I said, well, what if I put her fruit compote without the tang, right? How about if I put it in a salad roll? How would that be? How would I dip it? And it became a recipe in the book. And by the way, there's two dips for it. One is a kind of traditional peanut soy, and the other is tahini with pomegranate molasses.
That sounds delicious. I think that's so interesting. And as someone who also is a big traveler, I feel so inspired by seeing how other cultures combine flavors and use ingredients that are local to them. And so I think we have that part in common as well. And it also helps us think outside of the box, especially being in North America. If we're raised as whatever American Jews or Canadian North American Jews, getting to see outside of our borders is so important as well, and opening our eyes to see what's outside.
I think that when you start to understand how this food is shared across cultures, it's especially in today's environment, it's really important to understand that this is it's shared across borders, and it has a story from that I think that it just adds to understanding. I would say more of my travel, while there's travels in my book, more of my travels are reflected in my newspaper column at jweekly.com, because I still do recipe development and food photography while I travel. So I'm constantly trying to find ingredients that make a cuisine interesting in a foreign market, let's say like Japan, that people can get at home.
Yeah, that's very fair.
Yeah, I did a whole Hanukkah column based on flavors and foods I had in Japan once. And and I remember some reader wrote in, what makes these, Asian, I don't understand. And I wrote back, because they're based on foods I ate in Asia, and I developed the recipes in Japan, so that makes them Asian to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's funny. I mean, I think that's a fun part about what we're doing, and with us reinventing and rethinking what Jewish food is and looking at it from a 21st century lens at the same time. Is the world is so much smaller than it used to be. And the access to ingredients is so incredible, what you can get, whether you're in Japan or at stores in the Bay Area or in any major city. And
well, I will tell you that you can get Philadelphia cream cheese pretty much anywhere in the world.
You can,
but you may not want to pay what it costs. And also Tabasco sauce. Tabasco sauce is pretty universal. But other things, they're same but different. You have to judge with that. One thing I would say is that for most of Jewish food history, foods were adapted, adopted, and created. And then sometime in the middle of the 20th century, Jewish food seems to get frozen in America. I don't know if it was true elsewhere. I think Israeli food kept evolving, which is why we reach out to it so much. But Jewish food in America became cemented because it only got eaten at holidays, and everybody wanted what they always had. And I tell this story. I think I heard it first from Joan Nathan, but I've heard it's apocryphal anyway from multiple places. But this family, the mother is teaching her daughter how to make a brisket. Mm-hmm. And first thing she does is she chops off the ends. And the daughter says to the mother, "Why do we do that?" "I don't know, let's call grandma." So they call grandma. She says, "I don't know, that's how my mother made it." So they go out to the nursing home, because I guess great grandma can't talk on the phone anymore. And they ask great grandma, and great grandma says, "I didn't have a big enough pot." So you have these family traditions that carry, and they've been fossilized. And that hasn't been true of Jewish food up to that point. And I feel like people like you and me and so many other wonderful Jewish food writers out there, what we've done is we've unfossilized it. And I have great respect if your family recipe for brisket involves, chili sauce or Coca-Cola or onion soup mix, and many, many recipes that people really enjoy. Do include those. But I'd like to open your mind to something different. I'm not saying replace it. I'm saying just try something different. And my brisket, I have 3 brisket or pot roast recipes in the book, which is interesting. One reviewer says, "Well, it's mostly brisket and chicken." I think I have 3 brisket recipes out of 100. I bristled at that a tad. I will admit there's a lot of chicken. And there's a hefty number of vegetarian or vegan recipes, and there's a fair number of fish recipes. And some of the recipes have vegan or vegetarian alternatives listed, because this is how people eat these days. This is what they want. And this is how I eat. These recipes reflect my help with the food I serve my friends and family.
Yeah. And we have to adapt, and we have to think of different ways to do it. And that's how we make.
Right. So my 3 brisket or pot roast recipes, because to be honest, brisket has gotten quite pricey for a lot of people, and it's a big chunk of meat. So you're buying lots of poundage of it. So you can boneless chuck roast is often a great alternative, and it cooks up same, but different. I know I used that before, but it gives you a lot of the same qualities, but it is different, but it will do the job. One is a pomegranate molasses brisket. If people want that recipe, they can go to jweekly.com and search Faith Kramer brisket, and the recipe will be there. So the other 2 recipes in the book, one is an adaptation of my mother was the queen of pot roast, and she never made it the same way twice. So I sat down with my sisters, and we all put together, what did Mom put in her pot roast? Well, it turns out it was always tasted somewhat the same, but the routes to get there were varied. It was like she was using a GPS and and it just, you could go anyway and pick a route. So my sister's and I recreation of my mother's pot roast is in there. And the last one, which is my husband's favorite, is a pot roast that's made a lot like a Ethiopian beef wat or stew. And it's got all those spices. And I teach you how to make the spice mix too, if you can't get it. I teach you how to make pomegranate molasses if that's not available to you as well. I try to, if you go out and you buy a bottle or you make a couple of cups of this, I guarantee you it's not going to go bad on your shelf or in your fridge, because I'm going to tell you how to use it over and over and over again. Because I do not like orphan ingredients. If I tell you something once, there's at least one other way you can use it in the book.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And that's so important, especially thinking about the budgets and the economic climate of what's going on right now as well, to have the options like the chuck roast, make it yourself, don't waste the ingredients, because the last thing we want is a cupboard full of things we don't know what to do with. And I'm sure that they also probably make the recipe over and over again using the spice mix and the pomegranate molasses. So I'm sure that
I do lead some spice mix classes where we make the Yemeni spice hawaj, and we make the Ethiopian berber, and we make a za'atar. And I try to give people all these ways that they can do it. And I got an email from someone not that long ago saying, I guess they didn't buy the book. They just had the handout and they lost the handout. And they said they were so upset that they were out of one of the spices and they couldn't find the recipe where it was. Could I please send them the handout again? And I said, my pleasure. I'm so glad you're getting so much use out of this. Yemeni spice is one of my favorites, and it makes one of my favorite things from the cookbook, which is a Yemeni soup. When I was in Tel Aviv, I ate in this little Yemeni restaurant near the Haftika market. And the owner, who was the grandson of the founders, took me in the back and explained everything in Hebrew, but he was pointing, so I kind of knew what he was saying about how he makes his soup and his mix and his all that. And it was a wonderful soup. It was a chicken soup with beef kind of flavor. And I was thinking that how could it had such umami and savoriness. I said, how can I translate this into a vegetable soup? So I did. And I I make it with this Yemeni spice mix, which is available. Hawaj for soup is available commercially. It's just hard to find. So I make my own. And I end up putting matzo balls in it, and I like to make the mini matzo balls, and they turn this gorgeous golden color from the turmeric in the spice mix. So it's this big bowl of vegetable soup with this fragrance coming up, and the surprising kind of curry-like black peppery flavor from the spice mix, and the little tasty matzo balls for a little chew in there. And it's one of my favorite recipes I make over and over. And it's the one I would say that surprises people the most. They just think, oh, it's just a bowl of vegetable soup. But that spice mix transforms. And that spice mix is a result of thousands of years of spice trade. And and every family makes it different. Every region makes it different. So I don't like to get into authenticity battles, because I'm not pretending that what I'm doing is authentic. I'm just saying it's true to me. So I call it almost instant hawaj.
And you're appreciating the food. And that
Yes. And I often give a little commentary about how it came to Israel with the Jews from Yemen, and how there's famine and civil war in Yemen. And now, of course, we have the Houthis in there, and it's a whole nother discussion about it. But that's one of the things the international communities in Israel have preserved these cuisines that don't exist anywhere else anymore, or they're losing it. The Jews in India have never suffered the kind of repression or being thrown out of the country or things like that. But once Israel was created, a large majority migrated. So you still have pockets of Indian food communities in India, but the most vibrant one is probably in Israel or Canada or the US now.
So it sounds like that Yemeni vegetable soup is one of your favorites that you keep going back to. Are there any other recipes that you find that you just make over and over again for your family or your friends?
Well, people always ask what my favorite is, and my favorite changes with the seasons. I mean, I'm starting to get ready to get into my layered chicken and vegetable plow again. It's a spectacular dish, but it's a kind of a heavy winter dish in my mind, and I just didn't crave it at all during the summer. So you saute some onions, and then you add some chicken to it, and then you have these vegetables. And I make mine with a lot of dill. If you're not a fresh dill lover or you can't get it, you could use cilantro or fresh parsley. And I have to admit, I'm biased for flat leaf, but I won't judge if you use curly. And then you add the saffron rice, and it all steams together. I'm talking with my hands on a podcast. I'm sorry, but it all steams together, and you actually need to listen for the steam to see how it's cooking. Because if you stop hearing that little rattle bubble sound, you know you need to add water. And then when it's all done, and I've done this on live TV, and it's kind of unnerving. It's my Julia Child moment, because half the time I need to zhoosh it up a little bit. I flip it, and it comes out on the platter, and you've got the rice, this beautiful golden rice on the bottom, and you have this layers of carrot and greens, and then you have the chicken and onions on the top, and it's just beautiful. And I like, because it's kind of rich, I like to garnish it with a copious amount of pomegranate molasses, which is sweet and tart and kind of cuts through all that richness that's there, and more fresh dill. And it's a fabulous party dish. It freezes well, so it makes a great leftover. My husband has one of those vacuum sealer devices, and he'll vacuum seal and freeze it, and then we'll take it camping in the cooler. Will last for 5 days a week, and we'll have it for Shabbat dinner on the road, in front of some wonderful rock formation or by the Colorado River or wherever we are.
That's fantastic. What a nice camping meal.
And I'm working on doing a vegetarian version of that with chickpeas. And my problem has been the moisture. The chicken gives off a lot of moisture, so I'm trying to figure out how to replicate that. But once I do, there'll be a vegetarian version of that one also. So the book has 52 main recipes that appear in a menu format. It's organized by season. There is some seasonality to the ingredients, which I'm very proud of. The reason it's organized by season is because of the Jewish calendar, which is a lunar solar calendar, goes by season. So the seasons are out of sync if you live in Australia, perhaps. But the foods that are in each season relate back to the Jewish calendar for that season. So for winter, you'll have Hanukkah and you'll have Tu Shvat. For spring, you might have, Purim can sometimes be winter, sometimes be spring, but you'll have Passover. In the fall, you have all the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, and also you have Sukkot, which is one of my favorite holidays because you get to do potlucks, and I love potlucks. Mm-hmm. But so the book's organized like that with menus, and some of the recipes for it are in the other sections of the book from the sides or the accompaniments and the desserts or what I call the fundamentals, like the spice mixes, the sauces, the chicken soup, the chopped liver, that kind of thing. And a lot of the recipes in the main section, even if they're designed as main courses, can be used as appetizers or first courses. And I feel like if you're going to go to all the trouble to make a spicy North African fish dish, you might as well serve it for a main course and not save it for a first course. Oh, and that's a good example of a dish that I give a vegan alternative to, because I found a way you could do the same flavors, get some of the same textures with tofu.
Exactly. Yeah. I think getting outside of the box of having to have a first course, a main course, and then whatever comes next is also a good way to make Shabbat and just entertaining a little bit more palatable for everyone, especially for first time hosters, or if you're not used to doing it on your own, there's no rule book to say you have to have a main dish of, let's say, chicken or brisket and sides. You can make a whole dinner out of sides if you want to. Or
in my summer menus, I call it the 2 salad Shabbat, where it's just salads.
Yeah, that's what mine.
So these menus not only refer back to other recipes in the book. They also, you don't need me to tell you how to make steamed green beans. The steamed green beans or something similar is the best side. I just put it in there. I often outsource dessert. Dessert's the easiest thing to outsource because there's so many great bakeries or people, if you're having people over, people love to make dessert to bring or pick up dessert. It's really easy because it doesn't affect the cohesion of the rest of the menu. But in the forward, in the introduction sections, I'm very clear that it's your Shabbat, it's your chance to make connection. What's important is the intention that you bring to the table, not the food. And the food's just a really nice way to express your intention. But if you're going to do a takeout pizza and you make it Shabbat, you have made it Shabbat. Shabbat happens whether we serve anything or not. So, I try to encourage people. I want them to try new recipes. I want them to think about the Jewish connections to the recipes. I want them to expand their palates, but I don't want them to think they can't have Shabbat if they're not going to do all this. So I try to explain that. I also give the choreography of Shabbat from I have a lot of friends who are in interfaith marriages. My own children are in interfaith relationships. And I wanted to bring the beauty of Shabbat to everybody. And I felt that I had worked hard, that someone who wasn't knowledgeable could gain some understanding and understand how to practice this. And I've been so pleasantly surprised by the reception in the Orthodox observant community that they find such value in this book as well. And it's just been heartwarming. Probably my favorite story is of a woman who became a Jew by choice about 20 years ago. And her mother always wanted to be supportive of her choice of being a Jew and didn't know how to go about it. And they bought this book and they're reading it together. I go into what is Jewish food. I go into the ingredients. I go into a lot of Jewish history. I explain the Jewish calendar in the sections. I have all these essays. So I try to give as much context as I can to both the food and to Shabbat.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of family as well, you have kids of your own and now grandkids. I know that you have at least one new grandchild.
I have 2 granddaughters, almost 3 and
very new,
like 4 months old, something like that.
Do your kids, obviously the grandkids are separate, but do your kids and extended family share your love of cooking and Jewish food as well?
Well, I have one kid that he assembles food. He gets things together and he assembles food. But his wife is quite a good cook, and he appreciates good food. But he doesn't have the most sophisticated palate. He was my picky eater growing up, and it's nice to see that his kids so far are not picky eaters and they eat everything with relish. And to watch Reese devour her first matzo ball was really something special. Yeah. And then my other son is an accomplished cook and regularly cooks his way out of my cookbook and other cookbooks and invents his own concoctions. And he's kind of my partner in crime when it comes to food.
That's great. I love that. I feel like that's the goal. You want your kids to love food, even if they don't.
I would say even the one that isn't much of a cook, he appreciates food and understands what goes into food and he's got somewhat of an educated palate. It's just more limited than mine.
That's very fair. You've got, when you do this as a professional, your palate it's comparing apples to oranges, I suppose, because this is what your lifeline is.
Right.
And when it comes to food and making food now, is there a food trend that you love, that you've really enjoyed seeing? Or is there a food trend that you're just thinking like, man, get that away from me, I hate that?
I would say that one food trend that worked out really well for me is I was recommending ingredients that people would think was exotic, going back a dozen or more years, like pomegranate molasses. And then that whole Middle Eastern, Near Eastern flavor palette has become extremely popular, thanks to cookbooks like Jerusalem and other forces coming in. So it's easier than ever to get people to for people to find the ingredients I love and recommend. So that's a food trend I've benefited from. I am not much of an appliance cooker. I have an assortment of pressure cookers and slow cookers that I've always used, but now with the Instant Pot and the air fryers, I've had to kind of push myself to learn how to use that. While I don't use them in my everyday cooking, I feel like there are a lot of people that do, and they would appreciate support with that. Mm-hmm. So those trends I've observed, but I'm not really riding the wave. I'm probably, and I'm just trying not to get swamped by it.
Yeah, there's always something new.
Right. I remember once my husband, he was somewhere and he came home and he got all excited about this hard-boiled egg cooker, and he ordered it online. And not that I didn't use it, but it's like, I just put my egg, I didn't change how I did it. Now we have this egg cooker sitting on our pantry shelf. We'll see for how much longer. It's prime space,
Absolutely.
I'm looking and what I'm seeing is that other foods of other diasporas. And I just saw a cookbook from America's Test Kitchen, and I forget the authors, I'm sorry, but it's called something like Food from China, Not China, something like that. And it's about, and there's been huge waves of Chinese immigration around the world, and it's affected their food just like the diaspora for Jewish food has affected our food. And so I see more and more that. I see that in Arab cuisine. I see it in Filipino cuisine. I see it in different cuisines from Africa. And I really appreciate that, because that's kind of what our cooking, and your cooking too, your cooking, and a lot of us Jewish food writers that are working today with more modern flavors rather than historic flavors, are seeing that this food adapts as it travels. And I particularly like Indian Chinese food. So I really understand the fact, and it's very different than American Chinese food. And I've had Chinese food around the world. The Dominican Republic, for example, the food there was very different. I did like getting fried platanos with my Chinese food. That was pretty cool. But, and I grew up in New York, where my favorite diners were Cuban Chinese. So, it's just a fact of life that this is how the food is. And I love seeing people claim it and reclaim it and make it something that is theirs.
Mm-hmm. I think that I don't know if that's a trend per se, but I think it's just the trend that we're moving into, almost like it.
I think it's a cookbook trend. A lot of these authors are this is the food they grew up with. I mean, I've been seeing it for about 5-10 years, but it just seems like with Indian food, with American-born Indian people writing about the food their mother made them, which was sometimes Indian, sometimes some combination, sometimes very American, or maybe they were trying to learn how to cook Italian. It's just, I can't tell you how many places I've been to around the world with their idea of where brownies, the idea of making a brownie just fascinates them. Mm-hmm. And I was in a hotel in New Delhi, and it was late night and I couldn't sleep. And I found an English language channel that was doing a cooking show. I said, okay, well, I'll watch this. And I'm very excited. And I'm going to take out a paper and a pen, and I'm going to write down this recipe. It's going to make such a great column. I've learned this recipe, and I was in this, and they covered how to make an American style brownie. So
that's funny. And
then I was in a restaurant in France near Monet's house in Normandy, and the people sitting next to us had spent a lot of time in America. And so their English was very good, and they were talking us through the menu. And said, oh yes, and their dessert is spectacular. You have to get it. And I said, well, what's the dessert? Brownies. So just from all over the world, I've gotten brownie love. I don't especially have my own recipe for it, but it's just how food spreads now. It's very different.
Yeah, that's very true. And I'm honestly not a brownie girl. So whenever I see that, I'm like, I could very much do without a brownie for the foreseeable future. So I have found that as well, that sometimes I get that, and it's people are so excited about it. And I'm like, but I'm here. I want to eat something from here. I don't want an American style brownie.
Well, that is my husband and I do travel maybe half the year. So, and we like to stay places for longer than most people stay. I mean, because we like to go do the food shopping and see the markets and people watch and do some of the things that maybe weren't typical tourist priorities. And if we have a little more time, we can get into some of those. And the biggest thing we had to overcome as travelers is having our expectation that it should be like how we think it should be. Mm-hmm. That this is how people live their life. This is what they want to eat. And life has changed from the French cookbook that maybe Julia Child wrote to how people actually eat in these different cities in France and what have you. And you just kind of go with it and explore it. But if there's something you really, really want to taste that's traditional, I recommend you do your research beforehand and then make a reservation for it so you don't get locked out. But it's there. You just have to look for it. And then, of course, the food that's available to you as a tourist is not the food that people necessarily eat in their homes. And that's another issue. So all this kind of comes together in everything I write, and it comes through. And in 52 Shabbats, I had a format where I could write more than 600 words at a time, and I could explore that.
Very fun and nice that post-COVID we can get back into the travel, and that you've been able to do that as well. So now that you're home for, I guess, at least until the 20th or so, for another week or so, 2 weeks?
Yeah, I'm going to be spending Thanksgiving in Singapore and Hanukkah I think I'll be in India. So it's going to be a very international menus. And I'm looking forward to it. But Hanukkah I have other favorite holidays, but I think I don't know anyone who doesn't like Hanukkah. I mean, with the lights, sitting and watching the lights and the joy and the food, it's your excuse to eat fried food, even if you don't eat it any other time of the year. And Hanukkah is one of those times where there's so many layers of meaning. I was, well into being an adult before I learned there was something besides the Maccabee Civil War kind of story and the miracle of lights behind the story of Hanukkah. And every culture has different foods. And it's interesting when you take a look at these foods. In the book, I do a challah fritter because I find that people have a fear of yeast. And you could buy a challah, so you don't have to deal with yeast and all that. And you shred it and you mix it with either mashed banana or jam, and then you fry it up. And I give 2 dipping sauces. One's a hot fudge and the other is a sweet tahini sauce that you can dip it in. So you've got something, it's got all this Jewish connotation because of the challah from Ashkenazi, and I have the whole fried fritter from the Middle Eastern, Near Eastern traditions. I mean, everybody's got a fried fritter. And I think that sometimes they're developed from the culture that surrounds it. And since they're a lot of work, and because they're fried, they became a special holiday food. Other times the fritter came from another culture, and then the people moved to a second culture and they brought the fritter with them. There's all different reasons, but every culture has these special foods. This year for Hanukkah, in my J Weekly column, I am focusing on a North African tradition for the seventh night, which is the Festival of the Daughters, where it's a very women-centric new moon, Rosh Chodesh event. And it has some very specific kind of foods that they eat, like a sweetened couscous or fried foods or cheese foods. And I'm still working out the recipes on those. So I'm very excited now that I have granddaughters to celebrate the Festival of Daughters. I guess for me, it'd be the Festival of Granddaughters.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that. So last question for you is, if I was coming over for Shabbat, what are you making for dinner for me? What's for dinner?
Well, I gave this a lot of thought because you are vegetarian primarily, and that I know of. And I wanted it to be something special. Not that I wanted to show off for you, but I wanted to show off for you.
Of course.
And I would make my falafel crust pizza with fresh herbs and feta. So basically, it's my falafel recipe. baked as a pizza crust, so not fried. And then it's topped with fresh herbs and feta and all the sauces. Like I give a selection. So you want something creamy, you want something tart. So maybe you've got some tahini sauce on it. Maybe you have pomegranate molasses on it. If I have any in the house, amba, which is an Iraqi Indian fermented mango sauce, or if I didn't have that, I would use my yellow curry yogurt sauce, which is my option I give in the book, in the recipe in the book that has a similar taste profile. So I think that would be the main course. I think I would also probably pickle some red onions, and I like to throw some Szechuan peppercorns in that for a little bit of tingle and zing, and maybe put some of those on too. So that would be the main course. I haven't figured out the dessert, but I know it won't be brownies because it's not your favorite.
Well, to say to you, I don't have a sweet tooth, so I like salty things. So I'm not.
Well, then maybe I do my fruit juice sorbet, which is
perfect. Yeah.
The easiest sorbet. You don't even need an ice cream maker for it. And to start, what would we do to start? I don't know. I didn't figure that for in advance.
That's okay. That sounds delicious.
I'd ask you to bring the challah.
Done. That sounds delicious. So I'll pencil you in for the new year. And we'll definitely have some Shabbat dinner then. And I want that veggie soup, that Yemeni veggie soup. I will make my request. So thank you so much, Faith, for joining me today. I'm so appreciative. And you are just a wealth of knowledge and information. And if you've not yet seen Faith's book, 52 Shabbats, please go buy it. Go buy 10. Everyone should be supporting their authors. And so buy 10 books, 20 books, buy them all for Hanukkah this year, and make all of these delicious recipes that Faith was telling us. So thank you, Faith.
Thank you for inviting me. It was lovely.
Not Your Bubby's Nosh is a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network and is produced by Jew Folk Inc. For more shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast. If you've got questions, email me at micah@noshwithmicah.com.